on how institutional factors in government agencies affect developing countries in raising the national cybersecurity capacity building outcomes. So obviously, I'll start with key terms, introduction and background, and then problem statement, research questions and objectives, theoretical framework, research methodology, expected contribution. So on the key terms, I'll mainly focus on the cybersecurity maturity models. These are more or less like prescriptive models that aid countries and organizations to assess their performance by indicating how prepared they are to cyber attacks. So these are frameworks that were developed in order for countries to know and to understand what's happening within the country as well. So as Theo has alluded to, government agencies play a vital role in terms of capacity building in the government itself. So what these national cybersecurity capacity building frameworks do, they assess the country, and after the assessment has been made, an assessment report is done, and then now we assign government agencies who are supposed to handle these implementation strategies. So over the period of time, if we look at the continent in itself, in developing countries, for example, in Africa, there's a growing internet users. We have over 500 million internet users in Africa itself. And according to Seriano report in 2017, there have been almost $3.5 billion of cyber crimes reported. And unfortunately, 90% of the businesses in Africa are operating without cybersecurity practices or policies or cyber security mechanisms in place. However, recently, researchers have now tried to develop these national cybersecurity capacity building frameworks. For example, the cybersecurity maturity models, which help assess countries after that assessment has been made. Now the governments have the mandate to develop policies, have education and training strategies, as well as the legal and regulatory standards that help protect the internet users in the country. So these, for my sake, I'll use the cybersecurity capacity maturity model for nations, which was developed by the Oxford University. One, because I'm affiliated with the Cybersecurity Center in itself, because we use this CMM, this framework, the cybersecurity maturity model, to assess the country's policy, culture, education and training framework, and then the standards in itself. So the problem has been that even though we have done these assessments, like the Center at UCT and information systems, we've done the reports, we do assess the countries with these frameworks, and then we write these comprehensive assessments, but you see that countries are still not performing as intended to. And actually, most of the existing studies still show that they higher failure rates. So we're trying to understand what is really happening, even though we have these frameworks at hand that should help these government agencies achieve desired outcomes, but they're still obtaining very low levels, as also my colleague has alluded to. So, however, there are few studies that have been conducted to understand how these government agencies are using these frameworks to generate the outcomes, and also how the institutional context is affecting these government agencies in realizing the outcomes. So this is part of the data that we got from Oxford University, which shows the maturity levels for over 20-something countries in Africa. And if you can see, most of them are within startup to formative, which there are 5 more stages that they need to reach. But you see that within the continent, they're still not achieving the best of it. So my study, I've chosen Malawi as a case because Malawi, from the sub-Saharan region, is only, I think, it's one of the countries that have only been assessed twice by this model, which was developed by Oxford. So the first assessment was done in 2016 by the Commonwealth Telecommunications Organization. And then the second one was done by the World Bank in 2020. And through this, they were able to develop the national CERT, the Electronic Transaction Cybersecurity Act, and also they drafted the cybersecurity policy, that is meant to be used. But then despite all these implementations from these national cybersecurity frameworks, there's still not much that is being done. And actually the country is still facing a lot of challenges. So to answer this is, I'll answer my research question is how institutional factors and government agencies affect developing countries in realizing their capacity building outcomes. So the first one that I want to understand is how do these government agencies generate these outcomes using these frameworks or these reports that we give to them, and how the internal and external factors within these government agencies play a role in the outcomes that are being achieved. And lastly, to look at how are they assessing these outcomes after these implementations have been done. Because if you look, we have the national CERT, we have the policies in place, but how are they assessing? How impactful are they to the country as a whole? So for me, I'll use two theories. I'll use the institutional theory to understand the institutional context where these frameworks are being used in terms of government agencies, but I'll also use the capabilities approach to understand how these outcomes are achieved using these national cybersecurity capacity building frameworks. So in the capabilities approach, obviously, there've been debates to say it's more individualistic, but in this case, I'll use it in a group setting. And there are several studies that have actually used the capabilities approach in institutional settings. And actually, yeah, a study conducted by, I think it was Nambia 2019, where they used the capabilities approach to understand institutions, microcredit organizations that hinder the disadvantaged. And then finally, instead of the capabilities approach conversion factor, where we understand the social structures which affect the transformation into the capabilities, the achieved outcome, I'll now use the institutional theory, just as Bas Nicholson and Sabrem used the institutional theory to demonstrate the enablers and hinderers of ICT. So I'll use it as my conversion factor. So here, under the intervention of the commodity, I'm using as the National Cybersecurity Capacity Building Frameworks, in this case, the CMM as my intervention. And then the capability said, these are the freedoms to achieve the recommendations or the actions which one is able to achieve the desired outcome. And then now the outcomes from these interventions and how these institutional factors play a role in the outcomes that are being achieved. So in my case, I will use the qualitative interpretivism. And my sample is drawn from government agencies that deal with the dimension 1, which is the cybersecurity policy, and dimension 3, which deal with cybersecurity education and training. So in this case, I also interview the assessors, which are the World Bank and the CTO, and the developers, which are the GCSCC and from the Oxford University itself. So theoretically, not much has been done to understand how these government agencies are using these frameworks to achieve their outcomes, and also to understand how these institutional factors play a role on their impact on these outcomes. And then the practical contribution is to hoping to help government agencies on how to effectively use these frameworks to achieve their desired goal, as well as to for the assessors in understanding the impacts of these frameworks, to understand how are these frameworks being used and how are they being able to generate the outcomes within a context. So thank you very much. I stop here. Thank you.